Hi, I'm Carleton Sheets, and I'm so excited about the program we're going to be doing today, which I've entitled Triple Your Profits in a Third the Time. You're going to learn how, by buying multifamily properties and making some small cosmetic improvements, you can dramatically increase the value of that property. For example, in this multifamily property that I've purchased, no money down, I'm going to be doing some landscaping, repainting the building, finishing the parking lot. And by spending a small amount of money, I will be raising the value of this property about $150,000. So sit back, relax, and learn what I think is the very best way to make big profits, and that is by buying multifamily properties.
Welcome to the Carleton Sheets Real Estate video series in this presentation. And now your host, Carleton Sheets.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope I justify that applause in about an hour, hour and a half when we're all through. But you know, I really am excited about the program we're going to be doing now on multifamily properties, which I have entitled Triple Your Profits in a Third Your Time, because you literally can do that with multifamily properties. I'm going to start off talking about the advantages and disadvantages of multifamily properties, but I want to tell you that I was not privy to sitting down and weighing out all the advantages and disadvantages before I got in the business. I kind of was forced in the back door because I was fired from my job, as many of you know, and I was looking for a good educational course to attend as my very first one, and it happened to be on partnerships, and it really was kind of a turnoff to me, the thought of going to a course on putting together partners. But there's no other one scheduled in my area, so I did that, and I came out absolutely excited about the potential that partners provided for me in buying multifamily properties. And that never even occurred to me way back then that single-family homes might be a good investment. And even though today I recommended my home study course that people, when they're just getting started, should look at single-family homes for a number of reasons, which I'll mention in just a moment, nonetheless, the big money, and I mean really big money in real estate, is made through multifamily properties. Why would you want to buy multifamily properties? Well, number one, very plain and simply, multifamily properties on a per unit basis are much, much less expensive than single family homes. For example, in some of the large metropolitan areas of this country, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, single family homes many times are prohibitive in terms of buying them and being able to rent them out for a sufficient income to justify the purchase and to cover all the expenses. For example, a single-family home in some areas of the New York area might run $140,000 or $160,000, while you could buy a four-family for $200,000. So the price per unit becomes very critical, especially in high-cost areas. Economies of scale. When you've got a multifamily property, frequently you'll have the need for a plumber on maybe more than one unit, so they can come out and service two or three problems at the same time. Well, if you've got a single-family home, it means them traveling if there are multiple problems. And so there are certainly economies of scale, not only in purchasing, but also in service contracts with multifamily. There's also, interestingly enough, a greater chance of finding motivated sellers with multifamily properties. You and I both know that single-family home sellers frequently are very emotional about their property. You're dealing with an entirely different breed when you're talking about the owner of a multifamily property. So many times they are more motivated to sell, and if not more motivated, certainly more flexible. Which brings me to the next point, and that is seller financing is far more likely with multifamily properties than it is with single family. And you know, one thing I like too, and that is that management is concentrated. I mean, if I own a 30 or 50 unit apartment building, and I've owned them all the way up to about 185 units, I think, if I own a large apartment building, it is a whole lot easier for me to manage that property than it would be to manage a comparable number of single-family homes. There's a lot to be said about the ease of selling as well, and you and I both know that you make your money not when you sell property, but when you buy. You've got to buy right to sell right. So you think about selling the property at the time you buy it, and selling is easier with a multifamily property. There's a diffusion of vacancy risk. You own a couple of three single-family homes, one becomes vacant, you've got a 33% vacancy rate. With multifamily, the chances of there being a high vacancy rate is pretty remote. On the other hand, I would say that if you did have 100 single-family homes, despite the fact that it would be very cumbersome to manage, if you had 100 single-family homes, the overall occupancy rate on the single-family would be greater than it is on the multifamily. Nonetheless, I think the ease of management offsets that. But while we're talking about advantages, let's also acknowledge the disadvantages of multifamily properties. You need to know about that as you go in. It's in no way a discouragement from your buying multifamily properties, but there's no question the tenant turnover is greater. Single-family residents will frequently occupy a single-family home for a matter of years sometimes, 2, 3, 4 years. I've even got single-family residences that have been with me as long as 10 and 12 years. With multifamily properties, usually it's a transition, so the tenants frequently will stay on an average not much longer than a year. The tenant mentality is different. I have to agree with that. Single-family homes, many of the residents in a single-family home will care for their properties, take care of small things that may come up. While in a multifamily property, they want it done by you, the landlord. So there's a little bit of a different mentality. And I think finally, operating costs on the whole are greater with multifamily properties than they are with single-family. I look on single-family operating costs somewhere in the 20% range, plus whatever taxes have to be paid on the property. And in multifamily properties, including taxes and management, I usually figure between 40 and 50% of the effective gross income as a cost to own and operate that property. Now, I'm in no way discouraging you from multifamily properties, believe me. In fact, the other way around, I'd love to see you get into that business if your time, your mentality, your contacts with partners, or your own cash or credit situation would allow you to do it. But I just think it's important when you go into a new endeavor that you be aware of some of the disadvantages as well as the advantages. I'd like to give you a game plan. If you want to get started in multiple family properties, multifamily properties, let me tell you what I would suggest you doing first. And that is, number one, select an area to invest in. Now, I have said many times in all of my courses, invest in an area that is close to your home. I'd like to see you go no more than 15, or at a maximum 30 miles in a radius from where you live, because otherwise the management burden can be very consumptive of your time. Even if you have someone else manage the property, you're going to have to manage them. So try to invest in your area. So what I would say is you select an area in which to find a multifamily property. And once you selected that, do some market research. Determine what the price per square foot is for rents in the area. And you can do that by visiting apartment projects, or duplexes, or four families, whatever you're going to invest in, and just inquire, what are the rents? By the way, do you know what size the unit is, you can say, and by doing a little simple division work, you can determine what the rents per square foot are. Determine what the vacancy for the area is. It is amazing, if there is on-site management in an apartment building or a multifamily property, just by going in and talking to the lady or man who's there managing the property and being friendly and warm, you can develop an enormous amount of information. Boy, I'll bet your job's a tough one with all these people coming and going and all the problems, and believe me, they'll start to open up. Try to find out, how many vacancies do you have right now? Or if you don't want to be quite so obvious, you might say, I'm looking for an apartment. I don't know whether I want a 2 or a 3. Do you have any 2 bedrooms available? And where are they? What is the location within the complex? Doing a little simple investigative work can give you an area, give you a reasonable amount of information regarding vacancy rate in the area, which of course can be supplemented by talking to management firms in the area. Simply by telling them, I'm going to buy a multifamily property in this area and I'd like to know what to expect in terms of vacancy. It's all part of doing your research. Another thing I would look at is the average mix for apartments in your area. For example, if you have a number of multifamily properties in your area, look to visit them and find out what the mix is, what the unit mix is. How many 3 bedrooms? Are there any 4 bedrooms available? Are they mostly 1 bedrooms? Try to get a feel for that with 2 things in mind. Number one, determining if there's a need that exists in that area for 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms that's not being filled, and also trying to find if there is vacancy in the area, where is it occurring? Is it occurring in the 1 bedrooms or the 3s? Just as I cautioned you in my course in relation to investing in single-family homes, I would avoid buying 2-bedroom single-family homes. I don't like them. And I would also say that my own experience in multifamily properties, and I've owned thousands of units literally, is that there's far more of a demand for 2 and 3 bedroom than there is for 1 bedroom. That's not to say I wouldn't buy a mix with apartment with 1 bedrooms, but I'm just saying it should not be predominantly 1 bedrooms. But I could see in certain areas, though, that there might be a large hospital complex where there are a number of single men and women that need 1 bedroom. So I think it would depend a little bit on the area, but as a broad statement, 2s and 3s are generally more popular than 1 bedrooms. I mentioned earlier, where possible, talk to apartment managers in your area. Try to get any information you can regarding the whole subject of apartment ownership and apartment management. You can learn a lot from them. I said that generally expenses in multifamily properties are going to run between 40 and 50% of the effective gross income. If you would like to know more information about the operation of multifamily properties in your area, the Institute of Real Estate Management, IREM, which is an affiliate of the National Association of Realtors, publishes a book which shows the operating costs based on different unit size for areas in the United States. It's broken into 9 regions, I believe, and there are 50 metropolitan areas that are discussed. So if you're going to buy a 16-unit apartment building in Louisville, Kentucky, you could go to this publication and you could find out what you could expect with a garden-style 16-unit apartment building in Louisville. If you're going to buy a 4-story elevator building in New Jersey with 80 units, then go to this same publication. Now, it's not cheap. I believe that they charge about $160 for this book. But on the other hand, once you buy a property, if you will give them information about your experience operating the property you buy, they will give you a free book. So the first shot you might have to pay for, but from that point in time on, if you submit information to them, they'll respond as a thank you by giving you a free book. So you've established or you've decided on the area in which you want to invest. You've done some basic research into that area. You've got a good feeling for the product mix, how many 1s, 2s, and 3 bedrooms there are, what the rent per square foot is, what the vacancy rate is. Now it's time for you to establish your own objectives within that area. For example, I wouldn't just look at any multifamily property that comes along. I would decide to begin with, based on my emotional makeup, based on my credit, based on my cash, based on the time I have available, what my temperament is, I'm going to buy a building that's going to be no larger than 16 units. Or you might say, I'm going to buy a building with a minimum number of units of 80. You've got to make that decision. I would suggest to you, for purposes of this program, that we're talking about units 4 and above, 4 family and above. 2 family is not a way to triple your income in 1/3 the time, in my opinion. So determine what size properties you're going to buy. Something to think about, and it's really kind of common sense. If you're just starting out right now, think in terms of a small apartment project, which I would say would be in the 4 to 8, maybe 16 units to get started. A couple of things happen. It'll certainly build your confidence level. It'll build your knowledge level. You can establish a track record with a small property like that, so as you get bigger and bigger, it's going to be easier for you to attract partners. So I think maybe starting out small would be a pretty good idea. And next, I would determine your game plan regarding financing. Are you going to use credit lines you have available? Are you going to try to buy a property no money down with seller financing, which is possible? Are you going to get partners together to join you in the venture? These are things you need to be thinking about at this point in time, I believe. Decide how you're going to approach it. Let me talk for a minute about properties that will offer the best opportunities. I mean, once you settle on your area, you've got an idea about the kind of property you're going to buy, the size, and how you're going to approach the acquisition. Some properties that I think that offer the best opportunities are those that, for example, have high utility costs. High utility, high maintenance costs, because there are ways to cut down on that. Maybe more efficient heating units, for example. Properties that do not have separate utility meters are ideal for purposes of converting to separate utility meters, saving yourself a lot of money, passing that along to the tenants. It is amazing. I own one multifamily property where there are separate meters, and I'm getting about $575 a month, just to give you an example, on a two-bedroom, while in another building that I've just acquired, there is only 1 meter. And I figured out that the average cost of the water for each unit, based on that one meter, is running about $55 a month, about $55. And I could no more get $575 plus 55 is $630. I could no more get $630 for that one unit, even though I'm paying the water. You all with me? Even though I'm paying the water, I couldn't do it. They wouldn't pay it. And yet I can get $575 and say, by the way, you've got to pay your own water, and they don't think anything about writing a check for $55 every month. So there's a certain mentality you're dealing with here, and I'm going to be converting that building to separate meters, but I can't think of a reason why you cannot convert to separate meters and end up saving yourself a lot of money. If for any reason, after consulting with plumbers or whomever would be doing the work for you, you feel like you can't do that work and make it pay for itself, then stay away from the building. Just that simple. Properties that are poorly managed, I think, offer wonderful opportunities. You know, I heard Don Trump on a television show talking about when you sell property, you do it the same way you do when you sell an automobile. I mean, you steam clean the engine and you polish the car, and that's how you're going to get the maximum price. But it's amazing the number of properties that are on the market that haven't been, that don't have the engine steam cleaned and don't have the finish waxed. And those properties represent good opportunities because it's a sure sign of poor management. Improving neighborhoods or good neighborhoods, particularly, I think, offer excellent opportunities for multifamily properties. Properties that have deferred maintenance in many other ways other than just the external appearance, those are good properties to latch on to as well. Let me give you an idea of some properties that I would avoid. This is my own personal opinion, and it comes from my own investing, and it doesn't mean that I'm 100% right, but certainly if you want to make some notes, it would be some caveats, in my opinion, some properties to stay away from. Number one, properties that have a bad unit mix, like all one bedrooms, for example, would not be a building that I would want to acquire. I don't like properties that have flat roofs. Now, in some areas of the country, that is a very rare thing to find a flat roof. Generally, it's a gable or a peaked roof. In Florida, where I live, flat roofs are not uncommon at all, and I don't like them. Require a lot of repair and a lot of maintenance. Another thing in my area, of course, air conditioning is very important in Florida, but I will stay away from properties that have window air conditioning units. They're very inefficient, they're expensive to replace, and sometimes it's difficult to put in a central system, depending on how the ceiling is and how the property is built. It's difficult to put in a central system. So I will usually stay away from window air conditioners. If a property has an unusually large number of amenities, that would be very attractive to an amateur investor or a novice investor, but to me as an experienced investor, I'm very leery of that unless the property has sufficient number of units to carry it. And I'll give you a perfect example. A large recreation room in a clubhouse that may require someone to oversee the property during late hours, meaning you've got to put people on the payroll to be on duty after dark. Properties that have a large swimming pool and there are only 30 or 40 units. I will not buy a property with a swimming pool unless it's over 50 units, period. Unless it's over 50. Another thing to watch out for is inadequate parking. When you're out doing a survey of the area that you've chosen and you're visiting different buildings, it's a simple thing to find out how many units are in that building, and you can usually determine that by asking the manager of the unit, and then go out and count the parking spaces. On average, you'll find that it's a 1.5 to 1.6 parking spaces per unit in a building. And they come up with that because they say, well, the people who live in one bedrooms, they have one car. People live in twos, they've got two cars. Today, that's baloney, isn't it? Many people who live in one bedroom, husband and wife, will have two cars. So I would almost stay away from any properties that do not have at least 2 parking spaces per unit, and preferably more to accommodate visitors. So inadequate parking is certainly another one. You know, you just got to remember this. If it's as good, if the property you're looking at is as good as it can be, then it's as good as it's going to get. And we make our money in multifamily properties by creating value. We'll be talking about that in just a moment. Where do you find these properties? Number one, classified ad section. And when I say that, I'm not only talking about your local newspaper, but I'm talking about the Wall Street Journal and the USA Today newspaper. Excellent sources for multifamily properties. Classified ad section, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, and your own paper. Number two, real estate brokers, particularly real estate brokers that specialize in multifamily properties and commercial office buildings. They tend to go together. And it's a simple thing, again, just by inquiring, who in this area handles multifamily properties? What brokers tend to specialize in that? Very easy to determine that. A third area that you might overlook would be management companies. Management companies that specialize in managing large multifamily properties will frequently know when properties come on the market for sale or when they might be for sale. Driving neighborhoods is another source. I cannot begin to tell you how many properties I have purchased by regularly going through the area of town that I have chosen, seeing a building that I like, finding out who owns the building by going to the courthouse, looking it up in the public records, calling that person and saying, you know, I really like your building, I'm an investor, would you consider sitting down with me for a few minutes and discuss the terms under which you might consider selling your building, your property. I don't know whether any of you in this room own any multifamily. I'll just ask, anyone here own any 4 unit? Okay. Would you turn down a request like that? No. I mean, everything I've got's for sale. I don't know that I'm going to be able to come to terms with whomever I'm talking to, but I certainly can sit down and spend 30 minutes and find out how real someone is. So absolutely, drive neighborhoods. A property does not have to be on the market for sale. If you like it, pick up the telephone and call the owner. Word of mouth. Get word out on the street that you're looking to buy properties. You can do that by calling the people that handle your plumbing needs, your electrician, your lawn maintenance people, real estate brokers. Call them and just tell them you're looking for multifamily properties. You'll get more responses than you could believe. Auction companies will frequently be a source for finding multifamily properties. In fact, some smaller multifamily properties in the 4 to 8 unit range are frequently auctioned off, either because they're REO properties or because the seller feels, as I do, that there's more of a movement today toward auctions, and that's true. Many properties that are not distressed properties, either financially or physically, are being sold at auction. So getting word out on the street to auction companies would be another way. Okay, this is where to find them. Let's talk about buying them now. I'm a great believer, as some of you know from my courses, in letters of intent. If I find a property and I have reason to believe that I might be able to negotiate terms or a sale price that I'm looking for, I will send a letter of intent to the owner of the property outlining the way I would buy the property. And I would generally tell the owner in that letter of intent the contingencies in general that I would want to incorporate into a contract. For example, I might say, I'm very interested in buying your property and would consider buying it under the following terms. It could be a multiple offer. Number one, all cash. Number two, cash and paper. Or number three, them holding all the paper. Naturally, I would say any of the above offers would be conditioned upon my examining the operating statements for the property for the last 3 years, I might say. If there's an interest on the part of the seller, then we would go to contract, actually have a formal bilateral contract binding on both of the parties, but again, with the contingencies spelled out in that contract. And here, I would be more definitive. I'd be more complete in the contingencies I wanted to put in there. And I'll tell you what those are in just a moment. If you are going to buy a property with partners, I'm not going to get into partnerships to any great degree today, but most of you, or many of you, I'm sure, have my partnership course, which I'm very, very proud of, and everything I know about partnerships is in that course. But there's two ways, basically, to put together partnerships. What we call a non-specified offering and a specified offering. And a non-specified offering means that I come to all of you and I say, are you interested in buying real estate? And you nod your head up and down, and I say, fine, let's all come up with $5,000. I'm going to take the aggregate of that money, a couple of $100,000, I'm going to put it in the bank, and when I find a property, I'm going to pull out that money and use it to buy the property. That's what we call an unspecified or non-specified offering. The most popular and the easiest to sell is a specified offering, where I say to you, I've got this property right here, this multifamily property. I'd like to invite you to join us in this investment. Problem is, I got to have the property tied up, don't I, before I offer it to you. If I'm going to give you a specified or a specific piece of property, I can only do it if I got it tied up. Now, if I go to the seller and I say, look, I'm an investor, I've got some partners, I'd like to buy your property. I'd like to give you $1,000 now and close on it in 6 months. They're going to laugh, aren't they? Number one, 1,000 is not enough, they're going to say, and number two, 6 months is too long a period of time. So what I like to do is, in effect, when I'm using partners, and this is important, have what constitutes really a rolling option, where I will say to them, I want to give you $200 and I plan on closing in 30 days. If for any reason I'm not able to close in 30 days, I want to be able to extend it another 30 days with a payment of $500. I'm sure I can do it then, but if I can't, I want to extend it another 30 days, I'll give you $1,000. You see how it keeps getting a little bit bigger each time? Because you are going to know within 30 days, or at the most 60 days, whether you can do it or not. Are you going to have some money at risk? Yes. Whatever you put up that you would stand to forfeit if you don't go through, that money is at risk. I've never failed to do one of these. And I won't steal any thunder from my partnership course, but you're going to find that all the people that you knew would invest with you don't, and some people you've never even met before will. And the first 50% of that property will be sold out within 2 to 4 weeks, the next 30% within 2 months, and the final 20% will take like pulling teeth. And I tell you how to get around that in my partnership course, but I'm just saying that the way to control property with a minimum amount of liability on your part is to have a rolling option where you got a little bit of money at first, then more, and then more, and then more. Many of you will find that you do not need partners. Go to a mortgage broker, be absolutely candid with them about your situation, whatever it may be. You got cash in the bank, you got great credit, you got cash, no credit, bad credit, whatever it is, and tell them you would like to have them find a non-conforming loan for you. That is one that does not conform to the normal standards set up by the secondary market. We call that paper is usually labeled C and D paper, I think. Not good paper, but there are lenders who specialize, mortgage brokers who specialize in finding lenders that will do that. You might even have declared bankruptcy 2 weeks ago, but you still could go out and get a mortgage to acquire a multifamily property. Here's an interesting one that I won't take credit for, but one of my students came up with this. He found a 10-unit apartment building, and the 10-unit apartment building was generating, as I recall, about $60,000 a year. And it was owned by the best of all people to work something like this out with, a doctor. A man who had very little patience for all of the problems of property ownership, a man who did not have time to manage it himself, so he was letting someone else manage it for him. And so he was paying a 10% management fee right off the top to a management company to manage the property for him. And my student who wrote me about this, and I thought it was very clever, he lease optioned the property for 3 years, a 3-year lease option, by paying the doctor $48,000 a year. The doctor already was getting in 60 minus 6,000. The doctor's netting about 54,000, but he had all the problems of maintenance and managing the manager and the worry that comes to a busy person in owning a property. And he did not have the temperament for it. So he put it on the market, and my student said, why don't I do this? Let me just take it over. I'll give you $4,000 a month. All you got to do is open an envelope once a month, and there's a check from me for $4,000, and give me a 3-year option to buy the property. By the way, I'll pay you your price, he said, but I want a $2,000 a month credit. Now, the doctor had asked a very, very high price for this property. It was absurd, like $500 and some thousand, way more than it was worth. But he said, if you'll give me a $2,000 a month credit or $24,000 a year over 3 years, I'll pay you your price. The doctor took the offer. So this is a lease option where in turn you would sublease to your tenants. Any income that was left over at the end of the year, you'd put in your pocket, and obviously the income here would be $12,000. And he met an agreement with the doctor that he would pay any maintenance costs on the property up to, I think it was $300. Anything beyond that, which might represent an equipment failure, a roof repair or something, the doctor was responsible for. So something to keep in mind. I thought it was a very clever way to do it because the student did not have cash, did not have credit, and he was able to make a good deal by an option. Yes, sir?
You said the difference was $12,000. Did he assume management then?
Yeah, the question is, the difference was $12,000. Did the student assume management? Yes, he took over complete control. One thing that he told me, and this was early on in the lease option, I think it was like 3 or 4 months into it, he said, I believe that there's a 5 to 10% rental increase possibility there. And so he was doing some small things. I think he told me he was spending a little bit of money, like $5,000, fixing up the building, and then he was raising the rent. So he had a potential spread there of a lot more than $12,000. Who are my income multifamily property owners in the room right now? Who owns? Would you consider doing something like that if you got a top price for it? Yeah, sure. He's saying yes, and you would too. It is not unusual at all, and I think it's a very creative way to approach people who have multifamily properties. I mean, keep in mind, at the end of 3 years, even though he was paying a top price, even if the property didn't appreciate, he still has $72,000 credit toward the purchase price as a result of the $4,000 a month that he paid. And what is his downside risk? Really zero, other than vacancy, and he has the right to walk away from it. So it was a good way to go. You found a piece of property. You have tied it up, perhaps starting out with a letter of intent, maybe even starting out with a verbal offer. But regardless, you somehow have consummated the bargain, the purchase and sale in the form of a written contract. That written contract has got to have contingencies. You've got to make sure that you know everything about that property. Every owner will give you an owner statement. That is, what they're telling you are the income and expenses. And you and I all know that owners are always going to inflate income, right, and decrease expenses. So the first thing you've got to ask for in the contract is 3 years of the applicable 1040 Schedule E for that property. And you're not infringing on anyone's privacy by asking for that. It's the Schedule E that goes with that property showing what the income and expenses are. I would ask for 3 years of that. You know by now that when you buy multifamily properties, value is a function of income. So whatever the income of that property is going to determine its value. And generally today, investors are looking for about a 10% return on their investment. That is, if you paid cash for the property, at the end of the year, whatever was left for you to put in your pocket would be about 10% of what you paid for it. That we call the capitalization rate, which is not important to know at all. It's just that it's generally about 10%. If it's in a bad area, if it's in an older area, people are not going to be satisfied with 10%. They're going to maybe want 12 or 13% return. But that's a decision for you as an investor to make. Is the property, am I going to be happy with a 10% return on this property, or do I need 13 or 14%? Regardless, the NOI, or income, is nothing more than gross income minus vacancy. That gives us an effective gross income minus expenses. That gives us what we call the NOI, or the income. If the net operating income on an apartment building is $60,000 and you're looking for a 10% return on your investment, then what is that apartment building worth? Answer, $600,000. So if you paid $600,000 for the property, all cash, you're going to get at the end of the year about a 10% return, or $60,000. Now, owners know that. Believe me, when you're dealing with multifamily property owners, you're dealing with people who are more sophisticated as real estate investors. So they will do everything they can to inflate that NOI. That's why you need to look at the Schedule E. Even looking at the Schedule E may not be enough for you, because there may be some expenses that are omitted that you would have if you bought the property. Let me give you a big one: management. You see, here we've got an income. It doesn't matter, I don't have an income up here, but let's say the income on this property, just to pick a figure, was $120,000, meaning that vacancy and expenses total 50%. $120,000, if the person manages it himself or herself, the owner of the property, they can't put down management as a deduction on their federal income tax, can they? They can't do it. So it's not there. Well, if you're not wise to that, you buy the property thinking it's got a $60,000 NOI, you hire Stewart here to manage the property, and bingo, you've lost $12,000 a year. And $12,000 relates to what kind of value? 120, you're right, $120,000. So this property is not worth $600,000 because the NOI does not reflect management. It has not been included here. If you subtract $12,000 from $60,000, it comes out $48,000. The building's not worth $600, it's worth $480,000. So just be very alert to all the expenses you're going to be faced with when you buy that property, and don't overpay for it. So you've got to determine value using the income approach, which we just discussed. Second thing I would do would be to look at the per unit cost compared to other sales in the area. Now, if a multifamily property is on the market, that's not a sale. The asking price has no effect at all on what you pay for a piece of property. Look at what properties that have sold, what they sold for on a per unit basis. And it really doesn't matter so much about the mix. I mean, it does, but generally an apartment will have a few threes, a lot of twos, and a few ones. And if you're finding that 5 or 6 apartment buildings, by going to the courthouse I'm talking about, looking up recent sales, if you're finding that they're averaging $30,000 a unit, that's going to be roughly what you should be looking to pay for, about $30,000 a unit. Look at the physical condition of the property. Now, you all with me? I mean, we've got a contract on the property, but subject to you're satisfying yourself about certain things. Number 1, income verification. Number 2, you want to satisfy yourself that you're paying a fair market price for the property based on other sales. And number 3, the physical condition of every unit. As an ideal, I would recommend that you physically inspect every single unit in an apartment. I recall once that I bought about a 95-unit apartment building, and I did not inspect, maybe 20 or 25 of the units. And I didn't realize that that was not an accident. The owner said, they're all alike, and let's get on with business. And when I bought the property, I realized that 10 units had been pirated. I mean, were absolutely vacant. Had been pirated of refrigerators, chandeliers, air conditioning, carpet, in order to fix the other units that needed repair work. And I really had no recourse against the owner because I accepted the apartment in an as-is condition, thinking that I'd done an adequate job of looking at every unit, and I hadn't. At the very least, randomly select apartments to look at without the owners directing you at all, but I'd love to see you do it with all the units. I'm buying a 32-unit property right now. We'll close on it in another 5 weeks. I've looked at 31 of the units, and the manager took me around. He said, they must have changed the lock on this. I can't understand. The key doesn't fit. He said, but it's the same as the rest of them. I'm going to get into that I'm going to get into that apartment before I close on it, but I just live in fear that maybe that's the one where they keep all the snakes and rats or something. Do you get an engineering report? You're probably going to have to if you're going to use conventional financing, an engineering report, one that will look at the structure, the roof, elevators, for example, the mechanical systems. Whether you get an engineering report, if you don't have to, is going to be a judgment call. If the property is fairly new, I don't know that you'd have to. The property I'm buying is, I told you properties to avoid a moment ago, those with flat roofs. This got a flat roof. I don't like that, but it does. But it's got central air conditioning and everything else is great. Property was built in 1971, and even though it's a cement block construction, I decided because of that that flat roof, that I ought to have an engineering report done on it. So I did, and it cost me $485. Not bad to get a structural engineer to go over a 32-unit apartment building. How about an environmental study? I don't think so, unless, for example, your property happens to be near a factory or perhaps near a business like a dry cleaning business or an automobile repair place, where until 5 or 6 years ago there was no controls over them dumping deleterious substances on the property. And if it runs into your property and they meaning the environmental people, come along later and cite you for it, you have got no defense. It's your problem. And cleanup can be very expensive. So you might consider, if that's the case, and I will not do it on the property I'm buying now. I've only done it one other time where I was next to a factory, either having a phase 1 or phase 2 environmental audit done. And phase 1 is where they come and they physically look at the property. They look at the rent rolls of all the tenants going back about 10 or 15 years, and where possible, they interview tenants and also study an aerial photograph of the property. I don't know what good that does, except to allow them to write a letter to me, as they did, heartily recommending a phase 2 engineering study, which means that they come in and they do borings. They take out soil borings at different places, and the first one I think was $800, and the second one would have been $6,000. So I said, well, if they believe there's evidence that it would warrant a phase 2 environmental audit, that I'm just going to drop the building completely, and I took a bath on the money that I spent. Radon gas, to my knowledge, is only a problem in just sporadic areas of the United States. I think every area has a little bit of radon gas, but whether it's a major problem with you, you should know.
Dumps problem.
Pardon?
They build buildings on dumps.
Not necessarily. He said, would it be building on dumps? No, it's not unless there's some radioactive material that's been discharged there. Radon gas is gas that that comes from naturally occurring radioactive substances in the soil. It's a natural gas. It can be dangerous in large quantities, and I know in Florida they say that there's a possibility of radon gas that has been discovered. I generally do not have a radon gas study made, but that's something you may decide to do. Here's something: equipment leasing contracts. The owner said, well, I lease all of my washers and dryers in this company, and we split 50-50. In addition, the billiard table in the rec room, the soft drink machines that are in some of the corridors, those are on a 50-50 basis too. Say, fine, let me see the contracts. Knowing that they're 50-50 is not enough, because I've seen laundry contracts, for example, where it said that it's a 5-year contract, and the renewal period or the cancellation period is literally 1 day. And if you don't cancel within 1 day, it is automatically renewed for 5 years. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So make sure you look those over. Get copies of those service contracts. I would recommend that you have a study done by the fire department. I'll give you an example. I bought a building a few years ago, and there's a national uniform fire code throughout the United States that may or may not be adopted by the local fire unit. Many have gone to it, many more are going. So 5 years ago I bought a building. Before that period of time, the city where the building was located had not adopted this code, and suddenly they did. I'm pointing to the gentleman here who's with the fire department. Suddenly they did, and they came out and they said, you have more than 11 units, and you've got to put in manual pull stations, you've got to put in bells, you've got to do this, that. $5,000 later, I had satisfied them. So I called the fire, this is 4 days ago, I called the fire chief in my local town, and I said, is there inspection of buildings going on? And he said, yes, we inspect buildings. We try to do it once a year. I said, have you adopted this code? And he said, yes, we have. I said, well, I want to make sure that we are in compliance. So I said, would you mind sending someone out to look at the building I'm going to buy? So he personally came out. Anyway, he said, that's wrong. This is wrong. You've got to have a firewall here. You've got a 45-minute wall here. You've got to you couldn't believe the things. And then on top of it, we had to change doors, or someone's going to have to. There's some windows that are made of plexiglass in some of the interior corridor-loaded apartments. There's a corridor and they're inside loaded. We're going to have those changed. Anyway, the total bill is not as bad as it sounds, somewhere in the $8,000 range. So I told the brokers handling this to call the seller and tell him that these things needed to be done. Now, can you imagine, you're the owner of this building, it has never been inspected. Here's a guy coming along under contract that has a right to satisfy himself that everything is okay with the building, and I tell him he's got to spend $8,000. He was livid. He was livid. And I said, well, you know, you'd think it was my fault, is what I told him through the broker. I'd never face him and say that. I said, it's not my fault. I said, you're trying to sell the building to me and you're making certain warranties. He said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, if you want to back out right now, he said, I'm going to let you do it and give your escrow money back. And he said, I'm not going to do it. And I said, well, I question whether you have the right to back out, is what I told the broker. And the broker said, well, I think he does. Anyway, bottom line, it's being split 3 ways. The big share is being picked up by the seller. The next share being picked up by me, approximately $2,500, which I don't like, but it's too good a deal to pass by. And the other part by the broker. But I said to the broker, I said, you know, it's not my fault. And he said, yes, but here was a sleeping dog, and you came up and kicked it. So, you know, I would recommend a fire inspection because you can get some bad problems if you don't. How about a termite inspection? Yep, absolutely. How about an appraisal? If an appraisal is not required, I don't do it. I am experienced enough in buying multifamily properties, in evaluating them and determining value based on the net operating income. I don't use an appraisal. But banks will require you to, or lenders will require that you do that. And I'm using a lender with this property. It's a no money down purchase, by the way, right at $1 million. And I'm taking equity out of one property and getting a bank loan. It's basically no money down. So they required an appraisal. So I did as I always do, and I called the appraiser. I asked for all the, this is important. I asked the bank, I said, what are your approved appraisers in this area? And they gave me a list of 5. So I called them all, and I said, I'm thinking about having an appraisal done on the XYZ apartments. I said, what would you charge? Well, the range came from well, they first asked me if I wanted a narrative or a form appraisal. Called the bank back, they said a narrative. The price range came from $1,900 up to $3,800 for the 5 appraisers. As far as I'm concerned, they're all the same. You know, they've just been approved by the bank, so I think any one of them would work. So I went back to the $1,900 appraiser, and I said, I pretty much decided to go ahead with the appraisal, although I said I may not because I only have a budget of $1,750, which is a pluck from air. And he said, oh boy. He said, well, we could do it for $1,800, but that would be it. So not only did I get $100 off the lowest, are you laughing with me or at me? I got $100 off the lowest appraisal. I got just more than half off the highest. Anyway, the appraisal report, I've got in my bag right now, my briefcase. Appraisal report came in last Wednesday at $100,000 more than I'm paying for the property. And it needs work. The property absolutely will generate a couple $300,000 profit, I believe, for me in the next 2 years. But you can kind of lead appraisers. When you settle on an appraiser, do what I did. As a matter of fact, I didn't even name a figure as high as they came up with. But I said, I really feel like the building is worth about $1,050,000. And I said, after you look at it and look at the numbers, if you've got a real problem with that, get back to me and let's see if we can't work out whatever the difference might be. Came back at $1,090,000. So, you know, whether that's legitimate or whether he said he's seen my show, you know, little things like that. Yeah. Anyway, maybe he's trying to be a good guy. I don't put a high stand. I don't mean to any of you who might be appraisers. I certainly am not. I'm not talking negatively about your profession, but I don't put a big stock in them. I could have gotten all 5 of those appraisals could have come out differently. You agree? Yes.
Yeah, I can't quite follow. Why it costs so much? I mean, $1,700, $1,900, $1,800. Why so much for appraisal?
Very good point. Why so much for an appraisal? If you have a single-family home appraised, you're going to be looking at anywhere from $150 to $300. Here we're looking at a $1 million property, 32-unit apartment building. That's just what they cost.
So he's looking at what the value of the property is.
What the value of the property is, the market value of the property, exactly right. And if I'd have said to the bank, oh, I need an appraisal, and this is what 99% of the people do, go ahead and get it appraised, you know what they would do? They'd call the guy that bought them lunch last week without any regard for price. They'd say, I need an appraisal on the XYZ apartments. They'd get the appraisal back, and the cost of that appraisal, probably $2,500 to $3,000, would be on my closing statement. By paying for it myself in advance, I got the appraisal done for the bank with whom I wanted, at the price I wanted, and I got it done, made out to both me and the bank, so I get a copy of it.
Okay, does he get paid before, I mean, you paid him before the appraisal or paid?
I paid him 50% before the appraisal was done. He's saying, how did I pay for it? 50% before the appraisal was done, 50% when it was completed. I just sent him a check 3 days ago. They probably got it in today's mail, as a matter of fact. So, another thing you should do would be to go to the tax assessor's office and try to determine whether the property is over or under assessed. If, for example, you're paying $1 million for a property and it's got a value, an assessation of $600,000, in some areas that new $1 million purchase is going to trigger that property going up, and therefore taxes will go up. So these are the things that you should find, you should learn. You might even say to the appraiser or someone in the appraiser's office, if I buy this property, and I would never name a specific property, but if I buy a property that's on your tax rolls of $500,000 and I pay $800,000 for it, is there a likelihood that as a result of my buying that property for $800,000 that the taxes will go up? And see how they respond. In some cases, I think in the Chicago area, for example, there's no evidence that buying a property, no matter what you pay for it, is going to change the assessation for tax purposes. In Florida, it does. Another thing you should do is verify expenses. Now, you've looked at the 1995, 1996, whatever it was, tax return that the person had, and you've seen that utilities there were $6,000. Why don't you, since we're in a new tax year where they haven't filed, why don't you say, let me see some of your utility bills for this year? Matter of fact, I'd really like to see all of them and see if there's any pattern. Physically look at them. Physically look at them. Now, those are what I would call formal investigations. One of the things with the apartment building that I'm buying right now that I would categorize as informal was to go to the building at various times of the day and talk to tenants. I'll tell you, they can be more help to you in uncovering things that might later be a problem than you can ever find anyplace else. I was out there last week in another connection, and there was a woman that was just coming out of the building. I said, do you live here? And she said, yes, I do. And I said, how long have you lived here? And she said, oh, about 6 months. And I said, how you like it? She said, great, I really like it. I said, well, I'm thinking about moving here, and I'm just wondering if I did, what would be the worst thing I would find about this apartment building? And she said, well, I can't think of anything. She said, I really like it. And I thought, you know, that's great. And I asked someone else the same question a couple of months ago, and they gave me their input. So tenant interviews, suppliers and contractors, the contractor that mows the lawn, the one that takes care of the swimming pool, the electrician, the plumber. If you can find out who they are, and it's not difficult because you want to say to the seller, I want to use the same people you're using, call them up and saying, what do you know about the building? A great way to get information informally. And of course, during this period of time, you want to physically go out and count the parking spaces too. Presumably, you would have done that before you actually entered into a formal contract to buy the building. How long would it take to satisfy yourself about all these contingencies? I'd give yourself from 2 to 4 weeks. I really would. I would almost refer to that as a due diligence period. You could do that in a letter of intent. This property that I have right now, it never went beyond a letter of intent until I had satisfied myself on all those things. Then when I went to contract. And realized, to be very honest with you, I forgot to call the fire chief out to have the property inspected before I went to contract. So I did it on my own, wondering what I would do if it turned out to be bad. Well, it turned out to be bad, so then I got the idea, well, I'll go to the seller and I'll tell him he's got to fix it, because if he doesn't, the lender won't finance, and then I can get my money, because I've got a financing contingency that expired 3 days ago, literally 3 days ago. So I went to him 4 days ago and I said, all I've got to do is tell the lender this information and they won't finance. I can back out and get my deposit back. So I could have gotten it back that way, but we finally reached an agreement and he made me waive the financing contingency, which I did based on a good faith letter from the lender. So 2 to 4 weeks.
In Connecticut, and I guess in most states, there's certificate of occupancy. But in New Haven, they don't worry about that. The town doesn't concern itself. So you can get a property and it can be occupied. But if the tenant asks for that and it's not present, then they can stay rent-free until you obtain that. And when they come in to get a certificate of occupancy, they can go through and find many deficiencies, and they won't give the certificate. So I don't know if that's
What he's
true or
saying
not.
in Connecticut, they have a requirement for a certificate of occupancy, and that would certainly be one of the things that you want to satisfy yourself about in doing your due diligence, whether there were any zoning or code violations, or whether the property has a valid CO. And he's saying if it doesn't, I mean, you could have a 50-year-old building that obviously was certified for occupancy in 1945, but now it's degenerated. And if a tenant is smart, they can come into the building and say, where's your CO? And you say, well, hold tight, I'll get one. And in the meantime, until you do, they're living free. And when they come out to examine the building, they say, no, I can't give you a CO because this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. In the meantime, the tenant's living free. Incredible. So if you happen to live in an area like that, you just want to make sure that if you're buying a building, that you get a CO at the time you buy. A certificate of occupancy.
In New Jersey, any units of 3 or more require a state inspection.
How often?
It's 3 to 5 years, and it must be displayed in a common area.
He's
So
saying
when
any
you're
units in
looking
New
at-
Jersey more than 3
Yes, 3 or
require
more.
a state inspection every 3 to 5 years, and you have to display that in your lobby office.
In a common area.
In a
for
common
where the
area, yeah.
tenants can see.
Okay.
But when you're looking at property, you may want to look for that. And I'll tell you the last time it was inspected.
When you're looking at property, he's saying make sure you look for that inspection. Is that something you can call for? Like you got your building inspected 2.5 years ago and I'm buying it now, can I call for a new inspection?
I think I would if I was looking at property, just to have it renewed so that if there was any outstanding violations, you're not stuck with them. At least he's bringing it up to code.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Very good point. Just call for one to be done and make sure that it's right before you close on the property.
I think your building inspector can tell you about that when you're getting a local inspection.
No matter what state you happen to be in, I would contact your building inspector with the county or the city and just ask them if he knows of any, or she does, knows of any code violations, or would they come out and inspect the property to see if there are any code violations, much as you're asking the fire department official to come out. I think you need to be thinking about future considerations at this point in time too. For example, if you're going to raise the rents, what do you have to do to get them up? Presumably, rents are going to be, lease contracts are going to be coming due every single month of the year as properties are rented every single month of the year. So within 30 days of the time you own the apartment, you're going to have an opportunity to raise rents. Will you do it, or will you wait until you've spent some money on it? My plan is to spend some money fixing it up, doing some cosmetic changes, and then at that point in time, I'm going to raise the rents rather drastically, I think, as much as maybe $30 to $40, $50 a month. Thinking if the people leave, fine, I'll replace them with others. It's an extremely good location, and I need to do some interior work, so if anyone leaves, that's fine. But this is what you would give some thought to at this point in time as well. If you're thinking about the property as a condo conversion unit, I would say that on average, and I've done some of these, doesn't make me right, but I've got a little bit of experience. On average, what you pay for the building, plus what you put into the building to rehab it, should be no more than 55 to 60% of what you think you can sell the building for. If you pay more than that, you're not going to have the profit that you're looking for, because you're going to have closing costs, real estate brokerage fees, promotional and marketing costs, probably somewhere totaling between 15 and 20%. And so if you're not in for 55 to 60%, you're not going to have any profit when you make the sale. So these are things that you need to be thinking about there too. Many lenders today will not require a physical examination of the leases. So if you're buying a 100-unit apartment building, and Stuart here's the lender, he's not going to say, I want to look at every one of those leases. But what they will do is demand an estoppel letter from the owner of the property that the leases are true and correct, as shown on the accompanying rent roll. Unit number 1, Hartman, $500. Unit number 2, Jones, $300. What they do, they have a rent roll and they say, I promise, the owner does, I promise that that is true and correct. So that there would be legal liability surviving the closing if that rent roll is not correct. And that's what I'm doing with my purchase. In reality, if I'm buying a property from one of you and you are giving me that kind of an estoppel letter, if it turns out that it's not correct and I go back and litigate with you, my ability to collect is only as good as your willingness or ability to pay, right? So if you're broke or won't pay, then I've lost out, even though legally I had a right to make to make a claim. So you're much safer if the seller whom you're buying the property from has taken back a purchase money mortgage to assist in the financing, has carried back a mortgage. That way you've got something to offset against. Talk a little bit more about financing. Generally, existing financing on a multifamily property is more easily assumed than financing on a single-family home. So that is very definitely an advantage for us. If you're going to go out and get new financing, be very wary of any prepayment penalties. Now, someone came up to me before the program and they told me about a lender that wanted to loan them money at about the going interest rate, maybe even a point below the current commercial interest rate. They were willing to do that for 8 years. At the end of 8 years, he got the property appraised, and that company that was making the loan was going to get 25% of the appraised value. And I said, wait a minute, you mean 25% of any equity you have, the appraisal minus what you owe? And he said, no, 25% of the appraised value. Well, I mean, that's murder. If I buy a property for $500,000, and as a result of this benevolent lender, I'm able to finance 100%, and in 8 years it goes up to $700,000 or $800,000, I owe the lender not only the $500,000 that I got to begin with, but I owe him an extra $200,000 based on the appraisal. Watch out for things like that. Watch out for prepayment clauses. What I just described to you is what is known as a kicker, an equity kicker or equity participation. Not very common today because it's so severe, people are just staying away from it. Insurance companies will frequently fund apartment acquisitions. There are some government programs like the FHA program, which is good, the 203B program. You can buy up to 4 families with that. So don't discount the government as a source. There may even be some local area programs. I am always amazed, particularly when I was doing consulting and going to different parts of the country and investigating what local programs were available. I was just amazed at the number of local and state programs available to investors to either buy and or rehab properties. How do you find out about those? Go to your government pages, go to your yellow pages, look up under your county and your city, anything with the word housing in it or anything pertaining to housing, call them and see if there's any program available. Probably your best source, unless you've got superb credit, unless you've got cash in the bank, your best source is to go to a good mortgage broker. I really feel that way. Show them your circumstances, say, I'm trying to buy this building. Would you please try to qualify me for the non-conforming loan that we just talked about a moment ago to allow me to do that? I think you could be very, very pleased about your success in going through local brokers. Limited partnerships. If you're going to sell a partnership where you've got a property tied up, it probably should be a limited partnership. I'm not going to go into detail on that again because that's in my partnership course, but a limited partnership is good because the investors have no liability. They like it, and you have complete control as a general partner, so it's good for you. So limited partnership would be the way to go. There is a company by the name of Crittenden, Crittenden, that has a list of lenders by size and location. I don't know the cost of that book, but you could find out more about it through any mortgage broker or by going to your local library. Crittenden. Crittenden. They give a list of lenders by size and location. There is also another book called Fleets, F-L-E-E-T-S, Fleets, Income Property Debt and Equity Source Book. Income Property Debt and Equity Source Book. It includes software. It's about $325 a year. Fleets. Also in every area, you'll find mortgage brokers that not only specialize in income properties, but even promote heavily the fact that they do that, provide that service. Okay, let's assume that you've gone ahead and bought the property. You're taking over now. First thing I would do is send a letter to the tenants telling them that new management is taking over, which reminds me to tell you that there may be old management in place. And by that I mean either an outside management company or on-site resident managers. And certainly as the owner, you're going to want to send a letter to the tenants explaining the new ownership, but by all means, if you plan on replacing or firing the management in place, don't do it until at least 2 weeks have gone by. Give that period of time to get all the information you can from them before you let them go. At least 2 weeks. I made that mistake a couple of times. If you're going to make improvements, don't wait. Begin immediately, because that'll be good for your relationship with your tenants. They've gotten a letter from you. The next thing they know, they see a lot of improvements being made. If you've got any rules that are different from those that were used before, or if they didn't have rules, then post your own rules in the laundry room or the rec room, or send them out through the mail. And whatever policies you've got, enforce them. As I heard someone mention recently, whether you manage your tenants or they manage you is going to be a function of how you approach them from day one. If you've got partners, now's the time to send the partners a letter telling them that you now own the building and everything is in place. Make sure your insurance is in force. I hope I don't have to tell you that. And you don't call about insurance for the building 3 days before the closing. You do that way in advance to make sure that you can get competitive rates and also get the coverage that you need. Very, very critical. Utilities should be changed over. Generally 2 to 3 days before the closing, you would change the utilities over to your name. You notify all the suppliers, the people that are providing the gas, the people that are providing the oil, the lawn maintenance, the pool maintenance, whatever. Let them know. And at some point in time after you buy the building, if when you went into the courthouse earlier to talk to the tax assessor, if you determined that the building was being overassessed or overtaxed, don't forget to apply for a tax reduction or tax relief. You know, that sounds like such a small thing, and I missed that by 1 week this year. I was out of town, and I have a building that is definitely overappraised, and didn't realize that the cutoff date was, I believe, August 30th. And I was out of town and went in the early part of September. They said, I'm sorry, it's too late. Come back next year. So I know I could have easily have saved $3,000 to $4,000 had I gone in there a week earlier. But I didn't, so I have to pay the price. I mentioned earlier that you think about disposing of a property at the time you buy it. Profits are certainly made when you buy property, not when you sell. But I think it's a few words needed to be said about disposing of property. And at the time you do sell, whether it's a year down the road or 5 years or 10 or whatever, hopefully you will have set aside enough money in your budget or have enough money in the bank to do a first-class job in cosmetically rehabbing the building. Whether it's painting trim or steam cleaning or whatever, it needs to be in first-class shape. I think that's very important. When I get ready to sell a building, I'm selling one right now, I made up an owner's statement. That's what they call it, just an owner's statement of income and statement of expenses. But mine happens to be accurate because it is based on all of my Schedule E's for the previous year. So get your Schedule E, get your owner's statement, staple them together, and make about a dozen or 15 or 20 copies, because if you're trying to actively sell it, you're going to need those, and you don't want to go to the trouble each time to make it up. Advertise the property yourself before you list it with a broker. You cannot believe the responses you'll get from Wall Street Journal, particularly the Wall Street Journal, and USA Today newspaper. You might even consider exchanging your property. Several of my courses, particularly my graduate course, has a little in it on exchanging, where you can exchange and postpone the gain on any profit that you make. One source for selling a property would be an REIT, a real estate investment trust. They're interested in any property 200 units and larger, and if you've got a first-class property, because those are the kinds they're buying, they would be a good potential sale for you. And finally, if none of these areas work, none of these avenues work, then contact a local real estate broker who specializes in investment property, list the property with them, and do your best to negotiate a favorable fee. Some of them will want to charge as much as 10% on multifamily and commercial properties, and that's too much, so do your best to negotiate there.
What other causes would somebody making pretty good, decent money off a multifamily unit, why would they leave?
It's a very intelligent question. He said, we know that with single-family homeowners that divorce and death and loss of job and job transfer are all reasons for motivated sellers. In the case of a multifamily property, what are the reasons? I would say all of those also, believe it or not, plus unexpected things like unexpected vacancies that occur that are not easily filled back up. Maintenance costs are starting to skyrocket. I suspect I know in the case of the apartment building that I'm buying right now why it's happening, because when I first began to investigate back in September, I guess it was, I found two people that told me at night, they were just going out there talking with people. Two people said, we've lived here, one said 3 years, the other said 4. They said the drugs are so bad we're moving out. Just a terrible drug problem. So I said, I'm not a police officer, I'm just a guy that's interested in this building. Could you tell me where they are? And he told me. And the other person told me too, and it's only 2 apartments. And I told the broker who told the owner, and he got rid of them. He got rid of them, so that's great. That's, well, things like that. You know, things that cause, you know, the best of all worlds is someone's managing it for you. Every month you get a check, open up an envelope, and you put it in the bank. The worst of all worlds is that the check grows smaller. The management company calls up and says, boy, we got a terrible drug problem. We got tremendous roof leaks. You want to fix it or replace it? And, you know, it just gets to you. Yes, sir.
The last apartment building I bought, I put out a letter, and included in my letter was the fact that I used the existing tenants for referrals.
Oh,
and
why did I not say that?
I gave, last week I paid a tenant $50 for referring a tenant who I moved in this past week.
In answer to his question or his comment, how about getting tenants to refer other tenants? Absolutely. You can't do that with single-family homes. I mean, you move out of my single-family home, what am I going to do? Go to the next-door neighbors? I guess I could, but it just doesn't work that way. But you go to your tenants and you say, anyone who provides me with a tenant who will lease the vacant apartment number 305 will get $50. And it really does work. Thank you for that comment.
I bought a building based upon your course in 1987. It was the first course of yours I ever had read. And it's a 3-unit building. I guess I was lucky because I wish I had taken your course before I went into the next one, which was a different story. But this one is quite successful. I bought it and the rents were low. It had Section 8, and I got rid of the Section 8 tenants because I wanted to change the boilers. It had 1 boiler. I put in 3, 1 for each unit, and I put in separate hot water heaters. I think that cost me about $6,000. I put in water and sewer. I didn't do this in 1 year. It's spread out over 8 or 9 years. That was about $1,800. And I changed 2 roofs over the course of 8 years, and that was a total of $1,000. And I have a 37% return, and that building paid for itself a long time ago.
Isn't that
So
fantastic?
low rents.
That's good. And you did that before you got my course.
When I got your course and read it, that
Oh,
was the
really?
first
As a
building I
result of
bought.
that? Wonderful.
So the course really helped me.
So you get a nice cash flow from that property.
Yes, I don't want to sell that one.
Right. Would you be willing to sit down and talk about the terms? Multifamily properties can be so exciting. I mean, we've talked about all of the financial and physical aspects, haven't even touched on the emotional aspects, and I can't begin to tell you how exciting it is to go buy your own building, or maybe even one you own with partners, that's 4, 8, 12, 16 units, and say, you know, that's mine, that's mine. Particularly when you get into larger and larger properties, it can not only be a very emotional, satisfying thing, it can be extremely lucrative as well. And just based on what we were talking about earlier with that net operating income, if I can get every unit up $40 a month, which is what I want to do, 40 times 30 roughly is $1,200. $1,200 a month times 12 is $14,400. With a cap rate of 10, I've made $150,000 almost just like that. And it's going to go a lot higher than that. So if it sounds like it's an area that would be of interest to you, go to it, and good luck. Thank you. As you know from studying my home study course, I believe that single-family homes are the way to get started, to gain experience as a real estate investor. But if you're ready to step up and start making some serious profits, then multifamily properties are the way to go. Stay in touch with me and let me know how you're doing. And again, good luck, and thanks for watching.